State Farm and DJ Dramos from Life as a Gringo know making smarter financial moves today secures your financial freedom for a successful tomorrow.
Now we have a level of privilege that our parents never had. So what do we do with it, right? How do we utilize the opportunities that we have that they don't, right? And a lot of that is educating ourselves on how to not make the same mistakes they did.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. State Farm, proud sponsor of My Cultura Podcast Network.
Plug in a Hyundai EV and the extraordinary happens. From the charge time and range in the Ioniq 5 and 6 to the adventurous spirit of the Kona Electric to the 601 horsepower Ioniq 5N. Hyundai EVs make the extraordinary electrifying. There's joy in every journey.
EPA estimated 303-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 5 SE SEL limited rear-wheel drive and 361-mile driving range for 2024 Ioniq 6 SE long-range rear-wheel drive with fully charged battery. Actual range may vary. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Oh, hello there. Welcome to this podcast. If it's your first time here, welcome. If this is your 150th time, welcome, welcome. If this is like you've listened to every single episode, you're an insane person. But it's amazing we're here because we talk to people who are involved in independent music, punk, hardcore, metal, indie rock, emo, whatever you want to call it. If they've played in bands, if they've gone to shows and have, been creative, take those DIY enterprises out to other worlds. That is what we care about. And today is a celebration because the show has existed for 12 years. This is the, official/unofficial, because all I've done is basically take the number of weeks in a year and times it by 12. And that gets us to where we are at, celebrating the anniversary of this particular show. I've been doing it for almost as long as my child's been alive, which is, it's crazy to say that, but a huge, huge thank you to all of you who listen, engage, who have listened at one point and then drop out. You're obviously not going to hear this, but to the people who are discovering it for the first time on this particular episode, I love it all. I really genuinely love this music scene, and I love the fact that you yourself are willing to engage in a deeper level. You want context around these people whose art you care about, and you want to build more of a connection with this whole scene, as it were, whatever that scene may mean to you. Genuinely, thank you so much. And I'm going to do this until basically I can't talk. And even when I can't talk, like those of you that, traveled with me for the couple months that my voice was all weird, it's all good. And I am thrilled to bring on a special guest for this show. His name is Cord Jefferson. He is a director, screenwriter, writer, man around Hollywood, but most importantly, he was profoundly impacted by punk and hardcore, and we get really deep into it, like immediately. And honestly, he's such a cool human being because the only reason, number one, well, actually, there's more than one reason, but the reason I reached out to him as far as the knowledge of him being involved with this stuff was he was wearing a Propagandhi shirt. And I was like, this is like I just saw it on the internet. I was like, this seems like a random thing for a person to just like buy. So I dipped into his DMs on Instagram and he responded almost immediately being like, that sounds like a great time. I would love to appear on your show. And then we did it. I recorded it at his house. I got to see the actual Oscar that he won last year for his film American Fiction, which is absolutely incredible, by the way. Jeffrey Wright, you can stream it on Amazon Prime. It is well worth your time. And this is the first time an Oscar winner has been on my show. And anyways, that's why I wanted to celebrate this whole thing, because I love it. Yes, of course, it's great to talk to people who are in bands, who put out records and all that stuff. But anytime I can pull a person from the sort of, mainstream world, as it were, and then be able to highlight the fact like, nah, he's pretty much just a punk and hardcore kid just like us. That's exactly what I love to do here. So huge shout out to Cord and his publicist for putting this all together because, there was no reason he needed to do this besides the fact he wanted to nerd out hard about this stuff, which I will make a editors / publishers, both of them, a note here. I put him on the spot towards the end of the interview in regards to building his Mount Rushmore of bands that were influential to him in the punk and hardcore scene, and he wanted me to note that Jawbreaker was absent on there, and he regrets that decision. He actually texted me. It was probably like hour and a half after the interview, and he was like, "I don't know why I didn't say Jawbreaker, but I didn't." So, anyways, just a editor's note on that side of things. So, if you want to get in touch with the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Love to receive feedback, ideas for guests, whatever it is. I would say like 20 to 30% of the guests on this show are people who have been introduced to me via other people, and the web just continues to grow. So love that. You can also support the show for absolutely free by going on to, if you listen on Spotify, leave a rating. And if you listen to an Apple podcast, leave a rating and review. All of those things help this show get discovered by more people that should be aware of this. That's the important thing for me. It's hitting the people that need to know about this. And I'm exhausted right now because I just got back from a weekend at the New England Metal and Hardcore Festival. I recorded about 9 different conversations there, which I will be bringing to you over the course of, probably like October, November, something like that. So huge shout out to that whole team. Huge shout out to Scott Lee for bringing me out there. And I love that festival. It was so much fun, even though it rained one day, so that kind of sucked. But the rest of the festival was absolutely spectacular. Everything that was within the festival's control ran amazingly well. So, let's go ahead and dive into our weekly recommendations. For those of you that listen to the show on a weekly basis, I just want to recommend new music to you because really at the end of the day, that's the best way to discover music is through friends and, other random places that you discover music. So I have a Spotify playlist in the show notes. You will be able to dip into there and see all the recommendations for this past year. But this one specifically just blew me away. I'd never heard of the band before. They're called Dodstrit, Dodsrit. So Dodstrit. The record is called Nocturnal Will. And they're from Amsterdam. It's just an unbelievably cool blend of like crust punk meets black metal, and there's some smattering of other types of metal in there, whatever, melodic Swedish death metal, whatever, all that stuff is combined into a stew that is so good. It was one of those records where after the first song I was like, wow, looks like I'm going to be spending the next 35 minutes just hanging out listening to this record because holy moly, it smokes. And I still love it, finding those records from bands I previously was never aware of, and then I look at their catalog and I'm like, oh man, they got some other records and EPs, and oh, it's so exciting. So if you are a fan of metal or crust punk of any variety, Doddsrit Nocturnal Will is the record you need to listen to. And like I said, link in the show notes to a Spotify playlist where I'll include this record and then everything else I've recommended the whole year. So anyways, let us talk to Mr. Cord Jefferson. He came up in the greater sort of, Arizona punk and hardcore scene. And we find a lot about him because obviously that's why we're here. But the fun thing that blew my mind, and you'll hear it in the interview, is where he was like, oh yeah, I went on Warped Tour for like a week and a half with the Bled. And I'm just like, really? Dude, you like sold merch and everything? He was like, yeah, I just did whatever was needed. So anyways, Cord is a very talented human being. So you need to pay attention to what he's doing within the film world. And like I said, American Fiction is well worth your time. I loved watching it. I watched it on a plane, which I know is like, sacrosanct for most filmmakers. They're like, oh my gosh, like this is not the way you should have watched my film. But Cord, I'm sorry, but the film was still great. Still hits on my phone. So anyways, here is the discussion with Cord Jefferson, and happy 12-year-old birthday to the show. Anybody that's been, lived in small, sweaty rooms and watched bands play, like it's irrevocably changes us.
Oh, yeah.
And so like when you watch other people's stuff, whether it's movies, music, whatever, and then you see, I mean, it's mostly the other art forms rather than music, because you can easily tell like, oh, this person was influenced by like punk or hardcore.
Absolutely.
But like when you see those sprinkles of subculture where you're just like, I'm gonna use a random example where it's like Roman Mars, like well-known podcaster, does this show called 99% Invisible. Anyways, he would do these like, you know, TED Talk type things, and then he just started mentioning where it was like, it wasn't just like Misfits, it's like, you know, next level deep, where you're like, oh, okay, I'm listening. And so it is. When I saw you in the Propagandhi shirt, and I was just like, for one, that's not an accident.
Yeah, definitely not.
And for two, this is like not just a Misfits shirt. Like this is another level deep. Like even though Propagandhi is a big band, but not by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to start it off like very basically, just like, I mean, walk me through Propagandhi, like how you got exposed to that, and we'll go a million different directions from there.
Man, so this goes back for me to high school.
Okay.
And it was like, I was a black kid in Tucson, Arizona, not the bastion of sort of like black culture, if you can imagine.
No, it's very, very white there, as they say. Yeah.
Well, there's diversity, and there's like a ton of Latinos. It's sort of like very white and very Latino, and then that's basically it. Like you're sort of like diversity falls off the cliff after that. And so sort of like I was this, I had a lot of friends, and I sort of was, you know, I had a good childhood in sort of like many ways, but I did feel like there was this kind of, I was an angry kid. I was certainly sort of like an angry kid. And the first outlet, I think the first cultural outlet for my anger, besides film and television, as far as music was concerned, was rap music. I sort of grew up in this house with a ton of music growing up. So my dad was a big jazz head, listened to sort of like, you know, jazz records were just constantly on the record player. My mother was like Beatles and Paul Simon and that kind of thing. But then I had two older brothers, and they were sort of like super into rap early on. They were early adopters of rap music. And so, you know, my brothers had Eric B. and Rakim vinyl and sort of like all of this stuff that I was too young to sort of like understand at first. But then when I started getting into music and buying my own stuff, I started buying a lot of rap music. And I was sort of like listening to a lot of hip hop, and then got to high school, and there was this sort of like group of guys that I was sort of like kind of friends with, that sort of like there was some overlap, but we weren't really like hanging
acquaintances.
out. Exactly. I would say
yeah.
more acquaintances. Like they were these were like kids that in middle school, like started a hardcore band called Fuge with one of the guy who's now one of my, basically that entire band is now some of my best friends in the world. But, the lead singer was this Bosnian kid named Fadis, who had come over in middle school during the, his family was in Sarajevo during the war.
Oh yeah.
And so
refugees.
They sort of like, they fled, and he ended up sort of like, coming to our middle school, and he sort of sang like hardcore in Bosnian. It was like amazing. It was so fun. It was essentially Rage Against the Machine, but with sort of like lyrics in Bosnian.
Right.
And so these were these kids that I was like, they're cool. Like I like what they're doing, but I don't really know.
I don't understand.
I don't understand. I don't know if I'm like allowed to hang out with them. You know, it sort of felt like I'm on my own like rap music thing. Like I think that sort of like the kind of things that you're into shape so much of your identity at that age.
Absolutely.
Sort of like I was like, I'm into rap.
They're like, I am a rap dude.
Yeah,
totally.
they're into like rock, and like that's cool, but it's not me, you know? And so then I got to high school, and I started to sort of like hang out with these guys more and more, and I realized they were all sort of like listening to sort of punk all the time, and sort of heavy metal and all this music that I wasn't really familiar with. But I realized, and sort of it sort of wasn't spoken, it wasn't said at the time, because kids don't talk in these terms, but I sort of, looking back on it, I realized like, oh, there's like anger here too. Like this is sort of like this is an outlet for these emotions that they have, in the way that sort of like rap music was an outlet for the emotions that I had. And I started sort of like going to shows with them, and sort of like going to see their bands play, and sort of like it was this thing where it started to sort of it just was like a gentle, gradual shift. And then I realized like, oh, they were like, these guys were like, you know, a bunch of them are still professional musicians. And so these were guys who like really were interested in music. And so it turned out that they were interested in rap. Like this idea that you only listen to one thing too, like this was my thing, was also foreign to them. It was like, no, we like rap music too. Like, what are you talking about? We like jazz. You know, they were in jazz band too. Like, these guys were just like consummate musicians. And all of a sudden I was just being sort of like flooded with all the, you know, I remember picking up Refused Shape of Punk to Come, like at a show that my friends were like, you should listen to this. This is like the best hardcore band in the world.
Yeah.
And then I turned it on and you had all these like jazz
references.
all this jazz riffs and shit. And I was like, wait, what a minute. Wait,
you're allowed to do this?
I was like, okay. And I got really into like, you know, what I considered emo at the time, sort of. So like Saves the Day, I remember picking up Through Being Cool was like was probably my first Saves the Day record. But How to Clean Everything is sort of like the first Propagandhi record that I bought. And it was because I'd heard, one of my other friends playing it. And I was like, this is really, really good. What is this? And he told me about him. And so I went out and bought How to Clean Everything and just became obsessed with it. Like, just really, really obsessed with it. And I think that there was there was just it was angry, you know, it was angry. It was sort of like and that is the thing that I think I see sort of when you're talking about, like, what are the hints that you see sometimes that sort of somebody was involved in this subculture. For me, it was like, just like a real irreverence, just kind of like that. I remember listening to that record and, you know, there's a song that's just fuck religion. Right?
Of course.
It's like it says fuck, like, and I'm sort of living in this community that's very white, pretty affluent, sort of like very kind of cookie cutter in many ways. And, you know, a lot of church going people and just a lot of people that I feel different from. And so it had that thing of like punk music, which is just like, which I love. It's just like, some of it's just really stupid and just like, fuck you, fuck this. Like, I think this is stupid. Like, you suck, you know, like the things that you believe in are bullshit. And, you know, that kind of like sledgehammer style of like,
there's nothing subtle.
No,
not at all.
No. But that like sledgehammer style of like, I stand for this and I stand against that. Like, that was really appealing to me as a sort of like young, angry man. Yeah. And so it wasn't long before I was, you know, I was still listening to a ton of hip hop, but also like
incorporating these other things.
Yeah. Like, just all of a sudden, just like I was just super into punk. I was super into hardcore. And it's been that way ever since. You know, it was sort of like freshman year in high school. Just my world changed.
It's that time of the year where we all start doing spooky stuff and, you know, buying things that are Halloween themed and what have you. And Rockabilia.com is, of course, joining in the fun with some awesome Halloween collaborations that they're doing. I mean, they're working with Ghost to do like a lunchbox and a shirt. And oh my gosh, Rockabilia is just the coolest. And they want to offer you 10% off of your entire order by using the promo code 100 words or less. They're a great company, operates out the Midwest here in the United States of America, all officially licensed stuff. So it means the bands get paid, you get officially licensed stuff, and everybody wins. And you're supporting an independent business that's been around for 30 plus years. I love them so much. I love their mission, and I love the quality of products that they facilitate and ship out to you very easily. And if you run into any problems, their customer service gets you handled ASAP. I love this company. And you know, because I talk about it on a week-to-week basis, but there's a reason that I want you to now, just like literally now, go to rockabilia.com, find all of the fun stuff that you can buy. I don't care if it's like Bob Marley or the Grateful Dead or Metallica, you can find it all there. Rockabilia.com, 100 words or less is the promo code. The identity that you get attached to, because I mean, obviously every kid as they're entering junior high and high school is just trying to find out not only who the hell they are, but then like, where am I going to find my friend?
Exactly.
What am I going to do? And there is something that is so comforting when you do find a scene and be like, oh, I can identify as this, you know, anarchist, you know, socialist, vegan, straight, like all these labels that you can just put on this cloak and be like, oh, I have a community. Like,
exactly.
And then, but then to your point too, just the idea of like the articulation of anger that you're like, I can't necessarily describe, because like you're saying, like, you know, most people that get attracted to that subculture, it's like, oh yeah, some people have had a rough life and we all have our ups and downs, but just that, you know, suburban angst or whatever, where it's just like, I don't have too much to be mad about, but there is something.
Yeah, exactly.
And then these bands and these lyrics express it in ways I never could imagine.
Exactly. And I think that is like, that to me is, you know, as you just said, I didn't have like well, you know, I had normal teenage problems. I had normal kid, like my parents got divorced. That sort of like pissed me off when they got divorced when I was 14. I was a black kid with like a weird name in this like very sort of like very homogenous community. And so, but my life was also like very nice in many ways, you know, and like I said, I had a lot of friends. I was good in school. I played soccer. Like I sort of like I had a sort of, in many ways, a sort of pretty good childhood. But as you said, like there was just something, I just felt different.
Yep.
You know, I just felt like an outsider. And when I met my sort of like friends who were in bands and in that scene, it was like all of a sudden, I always felt weird. And it was like all of a sudden, like weird was cool. Then.
The weirdness was embraced.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It was like, no, we're all weird. Like that's why we do this, you know, is because we feel weird and sort of like we want to celebrate that difference and sort of like it's actually good to be different.
Right.
And I had sort of like felt for so long like I need to fit in. You know, I was the black kid that wished my hair was straight and that I had blue eyes and that sort of like my skin was, you know, I wish that my name was Frank and not Cord. You know, I was just like, why can't you guys name me something
easier?
normal? Yeah, you know what I mean?
Totally.
And so all of a sudden I found this community that was like, no, we like being weird. Like we like being different. That's important to us. And that's sort of like valued in this community. And so it felt like, oh,
right.
Okay. This is an outlet for that feeling.
Yeah. Characters welcome here, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But I love, especially too, I mean, now that you can look back at the lineage of obviously both, you know, hip hop and punk and hardcore and then see the absolute similarities that they have in regards to, you know, rebellion music, like everything that exists in both of those scenes. And I just love the fact that whether or not you actually articulated or recognize that, but seeing the fact that it's like, oh, like they're doing something, like I can still listen to this because that is such a bridge for kids to get over.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're saying, where it's like, what do you mean this band is incorporating jazz into it?
Yeah. Exactly.
You're a hardcore band. You can't do that. It's like, says who? You're like, oh, yeah, you're right.
And I think that's also I think that the lesson, I think that there's like, I think that now it's like incredibly important and has been incredibly valuable in my life is that, you know, the lesson that like your life is your own and the lesson that sort of like, you know, you don't have to listen to the rules and that sort of like, it's okay to break the rules and that it's okay to sort of like that very simple stuff like adults aren't always right. And sort of like the people who sort of like have the power aren't always right. And in fact, like that is, I think, an incredibly important lesson for young people to learn that irreverence and to learn to think for yourself, to learn to sort of like question everything. And it was all these things that music, you know, was doing. It was all these things that sort of like that was within sort of like sometimes the subtext and sometimes just the text of that music was like, you don't need to listen to what everybody says. And sort of like, in fact, it's important that you don't.
Right. And
I think that like, I grew up, you know, prior to high school, I was like a pretty big rule follower. Like I was, you know, straight A's and sort of like walk the straight and narrow and sort of like never question authority. I just sort of like did everything that I was told. And then I started to hang out with these kids who were like, you know, it's not like they were like stealing cars or anything, but they were just sort of like breaking rules and like saying shit that they weren't supposed to be saying and like playing in these loud bands. And like, there's, you know, I remember I went to this, we used to have, I cannot believe I'm thinking about this. This is
jarring.
This is like 25 years ago at this point, maybe longer.
Yeah.
But we used to have a concert at my high school called Dorado Stock.
Okay.
Cause we were, the CDO Dorados in Tucson. And one of my friends, actually the guy that I met, Sam Macon through is Bob.
Oh.
This guy, Bob.
Okay.
One of my best friends from childhood, and Bob moved to Milwaukee and he became friends with Sam, and that's how Sam and I met. Anyway,
got it.
He was playing in a hardcore band called Flesh and Bone Robot.
Okay.
And there was like a lot of there was a lot of Mormon kids at my school.
Okay.
Sort of like, because it's Tucson, Arizona.
Sure.
And they used to, there used to be a seminary right next door to our high school. And so like the Mormon kids could like leave during the day and like go to the seminary.
Okay.
And Bob's band was called Flesh and Bone Robot. And the singer gets up to the microphone and the first thing he screams burn down the seminary. And he like that's the opening
right.
of their set is him screaming burn down the seminary. And then they all had blood capsules in their mouth. They were all in suits and ties, black suits and ties. And
okay.
They had blood capsules in their mouth. And as they played, this like sort of like blood was sort of streaming down, and they started like kicking apart all the equipment. And like the guy who was running Dorado stock came up and he's like, "You guys are done." Like,
well, no.
They called the cops. So the cops started coming, and I'll never forget my friend Bob. I see him sprint away from the cops from the stage.
Yep.
He climbs the fence and jumps into the back of a pickup truck and then sped away. And sort of the pickup like went off into the night.
He had a getaway car plan.
Yeah, and I remember standing there being like, this is the coolest. Like I would never have the guts to do that. Like any of that. I wouldn't,
right.
I didn't even have guts to join a band. Like I always thought that all my friends were in bands. Like basically all of my friends were in bands, some better than others. But it was like, I was so terrified to even like get on stage. I would have been so nervous that I just sort of like always watched them with like awe, just like how you're so brave, you know? And I felt like when I watched that, it's still one of my favorite memories of childhood, and just like seeing somebody that I was like, that guy's a hero.
Right.
Like he's doing something that I would have never been able to do.
Totally. And you see it and you're like, I support this wholeheartedly. Obviously I could never do this myself.
Exactly.
But that idea of just, and especially too, where it all ties back to that notion of like, you know, not asking permission, doing things on your own, because it's like when you're talking about art, broadly speaking, it's like how, and especially too, it's like as you start to get immersed in subculture and you started to, you know, dive 7 layers deep on artists and bands, like there, you do that with films, you do that with books, like people, I mean, especially people that get obsessed with mediums.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
exactly what happens. And you then realize where it's just like, oh yeah, like, you know, the idea of writing or film creation, you're not asking for permission. I mean, yes, you have to ask permission to get millions of dollars to make the thing, but like the actual core of it, be like, oh, I'm not asking anybody else. I'm just like doing this.
And that's not, and that like, I started out my writing career in journalism. So
right.
And you know who got me into journalism was Bob Purvis, like the sort of like my friend who was in that band.
That's incredible.
Bob was on the high school newspaper.
Oh,
and he was like,
okay.
you should join the newspaper. It's fun.
Right.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever like published writing.
Right.
Was
with your own byline.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh. And it felt like I'd finally found a way to express myself.
Right.
Sort of like saw all these friends who were in bands expressing themselves, and I had friends who were like visual artists, and I had all these friends, and like I said, there was a lot of art in my home, and so my family had season tickets to the theater company in Tucson, which isn't Broadway, but it was seeing theater consistently, seeing a lot of films, listening to a lot of music. And so I always sort of was a fan of this stuff, but I didn't know how I would
like what your in was. Yeah.
And it felt, and journalism felt like a safe place because it was like, I wasn't calling myself an artist. You know, I was like, oh, I'm a journalist. But like sort of sneakily, I was like, but this is allowing me to be creative, and sort of like it's allowing me to finally say stuff that I want to say that I haven't been able to, because I was an op-ed columnist for the high school newspaper.
Oh, then I was about to say, because like your point of view, you can, even if, you know, the label of journalist, like there is a fine line of crossing, but like, if you're op-ed, you're like, this is literally me on paper.
Exactly. And so it just felt like, okay, this is my entree into the world. And it's not surprising to me that Bob was the one who got me into that. He was just a guy who was, I think that's one of the reasons why I sort of really adored him too, was that he was really open to expressing himself and really sort of confident in who he was at a young age. You know, it's like, I sort of, all of these guys that I was hanging out with, they were, I just sort of admired their confidence, and sort of like I admired their ability to talk about themselves in a way.
Right.
And I just, it took me a while to get there.
Yeah. But I mean, when you see that happening around you, whether or not it takes you, 2 years or 10 years, like some of that obviously rubs off.
Oh, 100%. I think that to me, that is just, I think that it is that just, it's really just that irreverence, that, that sort of like willingness to like stick your thumb in the eye of sort of like people, to let them know that you're there, and that sort of like you are willing to break the rules, and that sort of like that, commitment to your own ideas and your own thoughts, like all of that stuff really wormed its way into my head via this music and that scene.
Okay, anyone that hears me talk on a weekly basis or even a semi-weekly basis knows that band merch and shirts are incredibly important to me. And what has been really, really eye-opening is the amount of awesome vintage stuff that exists out there in the world. But there are many times where it's like you're just weeding through crap, absolute crap. And you're just like, this is terrible. Can someone like consolidate cool stuff for me? How about this? How about Mad Vintage, MADD vintage.com? Please go there and your mind will expand, and you'll be like, dude, I can get all of this really cool stuff at a reasonable price. Like, you know what it's like. You've been out there to some vintage shops and you're like, dude, $700 for a Metallica shirt? Like, I can't pay that. You go to Mad Vintage, and if you shop around, I'll bet you'll get a better deal than what you see at some random, Crossroads or Buffalo Exchange or whatever, where they're charging you through the nose. But plus, Mad Vintage works within the context of punk, hardcore, classic rock, 90s rock, the stuff that I know that you, as a listener of this show, enjoys. I've purchased from them. They have hooked me up with some merch. And like their stuff is just, I literally have seen shirts and sweatshirts that I've only heard about before. And the fact that I have an option to buy them now is incredible. So please go to madvintage.com, check out their entire collection, and, toss a few items in the cart, and then maybe check out. And then all of a sudden you have a amazing gift, either for yourself or a friend or a family member that knows what's up, because that's really that's what this vintage stuff is all about, to, signify that you know what's up. So madvintage.com, check them out now. When you articulate it like that, and obviously understand all the building blocks that led you, literally to this moment of us sitting at the table, just like you can't help but look at, your directorial debut and just be like, oh yeah, like, yeah, it's like, of course, like, just being like, yeah, this came from Scrappies, and then like this is exactly where the dots connect.
Scrappies.
Oh, I do know.
Wow. I didn't say Scrappies because I didn't know if people. So like, I used to hang out a lot at Scrappies.
Scrappies was, for the uninitiated, Scrappies was, the all ages venue, the youth center of Tucson. I can't remember I don't think I played there, but was very familiar up until it obviously shut down. It shut down at a hardcore show because the, terrible stuff happened in the parking lot. I don't know if you know that story.
No. What happened?
So this was because when they closed and then I think they reopened for a little bit, like it was maybe 1 or 2 years. This was probably,
they moved. I know that they moved locations downtown.
Yeah, exactly. But then there was like a literal stabbing in the parking lot, and so it was a whole thing, but it was, whatever, dumb hardcore crew beef or whatever. Of course. But Scrappy is just an important all ages venue, especially around the country, where it's like you just have these little, bastions of where it's like, most people would be like, oh yeah, when you go to Arizona, you play Phoenix, but then it's like, being like, no, you go to this, baby. right. So how
real heads are at?
That's exactly right. You can play Phoenix, but then if you want to play a really good show, you come down here.
That's where I got my first Shape of Punk to Come CD.
That's and they're probably at a distro, right?
It was just somebody standing in the parking lot selling CDs. I got my first CD there. And it was one more thing that I think is like worth mentioning is it was like that sort of like especially led me down the sort of like path of this scene, was that it was like I had, one of the fun things about it was that it was an outsider art form, it wasn't sort of, and rap had been that.
Absolutely.
But all of a sudden rap was now like penetrating everywhere. So like by the time that I was in college, it was like
It's mainstream music
everywhere. Yeah. It's just like it had become pop music. And punk had done that to a certain extent with like Newfound Glory and Blink-182 and stuff. But the stuff that I was really listening to was never penetrated sort of like the mainstream, you know? It was like, you had, like you said, like Propagandhi's a big band, but like it's a big band amongst people who like listen to this kind of music. You know, anybody else is like, what are you talking about? What is that?
Yeah, they actively, there are bands that actively put roadblocks in the way for them to be like, listen, because I mean, Propagandhi obviously could have been completely swept up in the whole, you know, Fat Records punk explosion in the 90s. Yeah. And they were like, we're happy to like travel alongside of that, but we never want to be No Effect.
Yeah, exactly.
We never want to go there.
Exactly. And so it allowed me to maintain sort of an interest in like outsider art and sort of like in this way that it felt like, oh, this is, you know, and again, like you don't want to be gatekeepery, but there is, you know, so anybody who wants to sort of like listen to the music should listen to the music and enjoy it. But there was something, there was like, I don't know, it felt like it's still had its purity, which I think sort of like is what some of those bands are looking for when they reject sort of like the mainstream, is like it allows them to maintain their purity and sort of like the pursuit of what they're passionate about. And that is sort of was special to me about that work too, is that like it sort of, they were allowed to do what they wanted to do without sort of compromising anything. And it just felt like, you know, rap got to a place where it was just all compromised, you know. It's just everything was like, we're doing this to be mainstream now. It's
of course
popular. And it's almost like it's like, you know, I remember, like I honestly think that I've been saying this for like months now, and I have no idea if it's actually going to come to pass, but I honestly believe that like rap, I've seen like the life and death of rap.
Yeah,
I think that it, like, I remember when my brother gave me Snoop Dogg Doggy Style for my birthday or Christmas or one time. And I remember him saying like, you have to hide this from mom and dad. Like, don't let mom and dad know that I gave you this. And I was like, okay. It was really,
it's contraband.
Scary thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool. Like, that's part of what makes it cool.
Of course.
Is that my mom and dad will hate it. And now it's like Snoop Dogg's at the Olympics. Like with his fucking ring glasses on and being like, he's like hanging out with Martha Stewart. And it's like, I remember when there was congressional hearings about this because it was like so scary and everybody was so afraid of it. And then it was like, to me, like the real sort of like beginning of the end was Kanye premiering a video on Ellen.
Right.
He premiered a music video on Ellen, this daytime talk show. And I was like, oh, this is like this. And now if I were a kid, part of the fun thing about being a kid is, in my mind, like being irreverent and finding music that scares your parents and sort of like finding something to play loudly that your mom and dad don't want to hear.
Right.
And now I'm like, what do kids have? Because now it's like you have 45-year-old moms doing TikTok dances to Megan Thee Stallion songs. And it's like, oh, this is no longer like what it was when I was a kid. And I think that would actually be off-putting to me.
Of course. Right.
I don't like my mom's dancing to this. I don't like this, you know?
Totally. Well, that's I always reflect on a joke that comedian Patton Oswalt said. I can't remember what record it was, but basically he was talking about, he was raised by a military father, like, you know, and so he's like, I'm terrified, like when I have a child and grow up, that notion of like, do I need to be a hard ass to my kid in order for them to get into Fugazi? Like, just that notion of like, I gotta tell my kid to do push-ups so they'll like hate me and they'll hate. And it's like, it's such a, like now it's like that sort of, you know, the snake eating its tail proverb where it's like now all of us are at that age where it's just like, damn, because I rebelled against my parents, like now I am this person and I need my kid to rebel against me. So do they like do full circle?
Yeah. Otherwise you're going to get Alex P. Keaton, little Republican.
Totally right. You're like, where's this going to land? Like it's such a, but yeah, you're right. It's like that when you sand off the edges, it obviously makes it more commercially viable regardless of your art. Mm-hmm. But then when you're trying to find that something that will actually stick and be, you know, like irrevocably change your DNA where you're like, I think differently because, you know, I went to scrap it. It's like full stop because you saw all these weird people doing weird things. And it's like, oh, there's 100 kids here? That's the biggest show I've ever seen here.
Exactly.
And then you probably like, and then, if you went to the Scrappies now, you'd just be like, how do we fit 100 people in?
Yeah, exactly.
That's against like every fire code ever. It doesn't make any sense. And so as you started to, really like dive into the scene and watch your friends' bands play and everything like that, how were your parents and your brothers reacting to it? It's like, Cord, what is this weird stuff you're doing? I mean, obviously you didn't like start a band or anything like that, but like, were they just like, you do you, man?
I mean, yeah, they were. The good thing is that my parents were like I said, they were sort of like into art.
Right.
They didn't make art themselves, but they were into it. And so they were supportive. It's like, it's music. Like, you want to listen to music? Like, you want to see movies? Like, they were always like, I was the only 7-year-old, I'm sure. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty positive I was the only 7-year-old in the theater for Do the Right Thing. Like, my parents took me, they were like, yeah, it's art, like, whatever.
Sure.
It's like, we've heard this is a great movie. Like, let's go see it. And so, I probably shouldn't have seen that movie when I was 7, but it probably had a big effect on me as to sort of like what I was interested in growing up. And so they were always kind of like, it's art, like, enjoy. Like, I remember I got the, do you remember the Judgment Night soundtrack?
Of course.
So that to me is like some real shorthand for like people who like know what's up. Is like, do you know the Judgment Night soundtrack?
Of course, dude. Yeah.
I remember my dad getting into an argument with my mom in the store over whether or not I could buy it because it had the sort of like, it was like the first parental advisory.
Yep.
That I had not owned because my brothers had given me some, but that I wanted to buy with my own money.
Oh,
and I was like, I want to buy this. And
you're like, it's the fusion of rap and rock. This is everything I'm interested in.
Exactly. And my mom was like, I don't know about that. And I remember my dad being like, it's art. It's just music. Like, who cares? And so they let me buy it. And so they were sort of like I think that, to me, the sort of like best thing that a parent can do, and my parents didn't always do this. I don't sort of like want to sort of like make it so rosy, but many times that were important to me, my parents were like, I don't understand it, but like, I support you. I don't understand why you're doing this, but I support you doing it. And I think that like, that was helpful to me. And so like, I would play my dad. I remember playing My Dad Refused because it had jazz in it. He was like, turn this the fuck off.
Totally.
Like, what is this? Like, this is not jazz.
Right.
Like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Just because they have jazz for like 15 seconds, this is not jazz. And I think that, but he was like, but go ahead. Like, if that's what you want to listen to, I don't give a shit,
Totally.
And then it was like, they cared more about like they had a real hard time when I wanted to get my ears pierced. Like, that was like a real big,
of course,
scandal. Was like, oh my God. And so, but eventually I just did it. And sort of like, my dad was like, okay, he was the one that was really against it.
Right.
And then I sort of like pierced my cartilage too. I pierced both earlobes and I pierced my cartilage. And a bunch of my friends were already getting tattoos in high school.
Yeah.
And I was like, my parents will go apoplectic if I do that. So that took like another 4 years until I was like,
until you
college.
were 18, 19, where you could come home.
Yeah, exactly.
Where you're like, hey guys, like, I got this.
Exactly.
And it's like,
exactly.
Sort of soften the
like,
blow.
Don't have to live there anymore. Yeah. As long as they don't need a bed under their roof.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those kind of like trappings of that lifestyle sort of like were harder for them.
Yep.
But just as far as sort of like, I want to go see a show with my friends, it was always like, yeah, you're going to go see music? Fine.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's right. Yeah. But then the delineation between a show and a concert, like those, and just like you're trying to explain to parents as you're like, oh, you're going to see bands play? And it's like, well, it's like essentially a garage, but like, so it's not a concert. Exactly. How many people are going to be there? Exactly. I don't know, 50 maybe? Like,
and my friends, like my parents also really, like, I feel like I grew up in a, I felt very fortunate because I also grew up in a, like my friends were not like, they weren't like I said, like, they weren't bad guys. Like, they weren't like, they were also sort of like I said, like, they played in school jazz band, like, they sort of like were active. Like, it's like they did a lot.
They weren't like dropouts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't like sort of like, they were like, stay home and smoke weed with us all day. You know what I mean? It was like, we are participatory and sort of like engage in the world. And like, we go to school and we do our homework, and like, they were participating in a way that it didn't feel like, oh, you're hanging out with a bad crowd.
Right.
So
like you're getting
no.
sucked down into this, abyss where it's like, you are not going to be able to be a participating member of society because you're just a burnout or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that was also, I think, beneficial, was that it was like, it didn't feel like I was like hanging out with a bad crowd. It felt like I was hanging out with kids who were just like into different stuff.
Right. Well, that is, I always like, I still identify as a straight edge human being.
Yeah.
But it's like, I felt like once I articulated that to my parents, it really was like a skeleton key. My parents were just like, oh, like, yeah, you can go wherever you want because I know you're not drinking.
Yeah.
And like
exactly.
that, it just made, and I always felt bad for my friends that had these real contentious relationships with their parents because it was like, you couldn't do all the things that like me and my other friends were doing not because we were calling ourselves straight edge, but we were just like towing the line in a responsible way.
Exactly.
That was like, hey, this makes your life easier if you do this. Yeah. You're not going to have your parents constantly on you to be like, you got to be home by like 8. And you're like, I can't go to the show because of it. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, all right, fine. Like wait to get ungrounded or whatever. It's so ridiculous. Because you were getting attracted to all this stuff, like, and you were drinking in all of these ideas that were getting introduced to you, whether it was, the political undercurrents, the fact that like, just all of these bands exposing you to these ideas. I mean, especially with hip hop too, of like, what racism is, like what, anarchy is, what, anti-religion, like, it seems like those messages were obviously like resonating with you. Were you just kind of like drinking all of that in and finding your space in each of those like verticals, so to speak?
Yeah. I think that it was just, I really do think that it just, that kind of thinking just really shaped my identity forever. It just really, and like my best friends in the world to this day are still all those guys,
right? Like
all those guys that first introduced me to this stuff that I hung out with in, so in my movie, so at the end when they're, when the judges are sort of like judging all the book titles all the fake book titles are my friends' bands. It's like, so it's Car Full of Bosnians, which is sort of like that. So Car Full of Bosnians is like all the Bosnian kids, like they formed a punk band when I was in high school called Car Full of Bosnians.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And like, I think Fuchsia's on there, Scathe, Four Alarm Fire, the Dishwashers, like those were all my friends' bands. And to this day, those are all like my best friends in the world.
Right.
Sort of like all the guys who were in those bands. And it was just like an Easter egg for them.
Absolutely.
When they sort of like went to see it, they were like, people were
freaking
out.
What are you doing, Corey? Those are all of our stupid punk bands. That's incredible.
Yeah. And so, it's no surprise to me that they're sort of like, they're all my closest friends still, because they really shaped my sort of like my perspective on just everything. And it was like, I really credit them because I think that it is so, I think it's easy coming from a place like Tucson where, I could have had a pretty sort of traditional life there. I could have sort of stayed there and like made a good living and sort of like bought a house and
become a teacher. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Married a girl from high school. Like I could have done all that stuff. But they sort of helped me realize like, no, there's like, you don't have to do this. Like we don't think that quarterback is cool. Like he's not cool to us. Like the football team isn't cool.
Right.
Like this is cool. You know what I mean? Like all this other stuff that has nothing to do with what's going on at school and with your parents and like at youth group and stuff, like all that stuff. Like you don't have to do that, and I think that it just really opened my eyes to getting out of there and sort of like figuring out what it is that I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. And that still took me a very long time. It took me I think I'm 42 now, and I think I'm just now becoming sort of like the kind of person that I've always hoped to be. It took me a long time to actually like find my identity, but so much of my identity is wrapped up in that, in just sort of irreverence and being an outsider and sort of like, and
small sweaty rooms,
celebrating the outsiderness of stuff, celebrating celebrating sort of like the differences and celebrating sort of your own path. Like that stuff to me was, because like you said, I had I met all these people who were, you know, I hung out with like all these straight edge kids who sort of were just like, yeah, this is what we want to do.
Yep.
And then I hung out with like these kids who were really into emo, like Get Up Kids.
Of course.
Like, and Jimmy World too was like
huge
hometown heroes for us.
Absolutely.
But it just felt like there was all these paths, but there was also this unification where it was like, we are very different in some ways, but we all sort of like support this like ideal and like want to keep this fire burning. And that to me has really shaped my entire life and certainly shapes my work today.
Yeah. I like the idea. The ambitions were always much greater than anything, to your point, of the containment of whatever it was that you were doing, high school, or like, you know, kids color inside the lines there, obviously, because it's like, they're like, oh yeah, like, you know, I'll go to college or what have you. But just the idea where it's like, you know, your friend's band's probably being like, dude, we're going to play Phoenix one day. We're going to get to Albuquerque. And like other kids would be like, what do you mean you're driving there to play in front of Fort? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Dude, my first time on tour was when I graduated college.
Okay.
One of my other best friends, Mike, was playing drums in this band called the Bled.
Of course.
Yeah. So the Bled.
Yeah.
So the Bled's
Pass the Flask, baby.
Yeah. That's. Right. I think it's the 20th anniversary. Of Pass the Flask. Yeah. So they're touring it again all over. But right when I graduated college, they were going on a Warped Tour, and Mike was like, "Do you want to drive the RV?" Like, we're traveling. And so like me and Mike's little brother, Jimmy, who's another one of my best friends, we drove the RV on the West Coast leg of Warped Tour.
I can't believe you were on Warped Tour. That's a good, like literally on Warped Tour.
It sucked.
I hated it. Especially in an RV. Oh,
so
dude.
Much.
Brutal.
It's like, dude, not only was like the schedule like a nightmare.
Yep.
I was like, it's like, you know, it's Warped Tour. It's a small hardcore band. They're not putting them up at hotels. It's like, where do we take showers?
No.
Like, it's everywhere we're going is like 95 degrees. It's so hot. I'm in the sun all day.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, you got to drive all night. So I was thinking like, yeah, we'll be able to hang out. And it's like, no, you watch the show and then you need to be in Bakersfield or whatever, like
Absolutely.
by tomorrow morning. And so now you got to drive.
Right. Load in at 8 a.m. because you never know when you're going to play for the day. Exactly. And it's like, the Bled, you're going to the smart punk stage. Exactly. You're playing meanwhile, it's like, I don't even get to like talk to any of the cute girls because they want to talk to the band. It's like, who's a roadie? Like, get out of here. Yeah. Can you give us your pass?
Exactly.
Because you're useless to us.
Exactly. So I was like, this is not fun. And
right.
So I did it for 2 weeks and then I was like, I'm out. Go,
yeah.
Enjoy the rest of it, boys. But it was like, it was really fun. And it was, you know, again, it allowed me sort of like I'm really happy because it's sort of like they're sort of like being in the, like my other friend, Noah, is another one of my best friends from childhood. And now he's playing, bass in Poison the Well. So like I have all these friends who are like still really involved in the scene. And it's sort of like, I love it because it keeps me involved still. It's like, I'm not, you know, I still try. I'm 42. Like I said, it's difficult for me to sort of like keep up with music the way that I used to keep up with music, but it's really nice to sort of like still maintain a connection to it via that.
Right. You still have right. You still have the touch points. And I think that's what to me is so engaging about this whole subculture is the fact that because it changes you as a person, like whether or not you're obviously not going to as many shows as you once did when you were 15 because you have nothing but time, but like you still care about it in the fact that you're like, oh yeah, I can dip in and watch this band on YouTube or what have you. Like
totally.
You're still able to have that connective tissue pulled together. And especially when you have friends that are still involved, it's like, oh yeah, I still feel there. Like
totally.
Obviously it's like you would never feel out of place going to a show.
No.
Like, I mean, besides being, you're the old man in the room,
exactly.
it's fine. Like,
yeah. I'm fine being the old dude at the punk show.
Totally.
Because especially because like a lot of the guys on stage are the old men at the punk show now.
Totally. So you're like, we're all the same age now.
Yeah.
We're fine.
Like, dude, I go to see Jawbreaker every time they come through LA.
Of course.
And it's great because I'm like not necessarily the oldest guy. With that one, I'm like,
absolutely.
There's like 60-year-olds in the audience in that one. And I'm like, this is great.
Totally. You're like, I am so much more limber than most people here.
Exactly.
Yeah. I can't believe they have a pit here. This is crazy. Yeah, no, you're right. There's a sliding scale where it's like,
Exactly.
yes, if you're going to the Echo to watch, Joyce Manor play, it's like, okay, I might be on the older end. That's fine. That's fine. But yeah, Jawbreaker, you're totally welcome in there. You probably like bands like Knocked Loose or Brutus or Drain or Nails. How about going to evilgreed.net? Because you can find web stores there that sell all of their merch, their vinyl, and Evil Greed is a great place where they consolidate all of these bands and all of these record labels that they work with a specific point of view. They're working with like cool, artistic, heavy stuff, and they make it very easy for you to shop all in one place. Put it all in your cart. They ship it to you fast from Berlin, Germany, but don't let that scare you. I know you hear that and you're like, international shipping is going to cost me an arm and a leg. Oh my gosh. No, it will not, because the shipping rates to us here in the United States are very advantageous. So hop on it. Go to evilgreed.net. And like I said, some of those bands that I listed, they also work with like Triple B, Flat Spot. If you like punk, hardcore, metal of the, independent variety, you absolutely will find something on evilgreed.net. And I just love this company and I want you to be aware of it, because after all, that is how we support independent companies, by hearing about it from friends and then buying it, right? So go ahead and do that and shop to your heart's content. I was curious with your, obviously you pursued journalism for many years. Why did you never make the journalistic approach to, music? Like why you ever be like, oh, I want to write for Spin or whatever. I
started, that was actually my entree into journalism. I started writing. I met this guy. I was living in LA. I was right after college. So I moved here in 2004 and I was living here, and I was working as a, communications coordinator at this very small nonprofit in Venice Beach.
Okay.
But I really wanted to sort of write. I was writing was what I came home every night and just wrote for myself. I would just write these things that weren't being published, but I just really needed to do it. And I met this guy one night there was this 4th of July block party at my, on my street. And I just bumped into this guy and we were just chatting. And it turned out he was an editor at this music magazine called Filter.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Remember Filter?
Yep.
Yeah. So Chris, and I was like, yeah, I'm interested in writing. And he was like, just, let's maybe talk about you doing a piece. And so I did I believe there was an alt country musician named Jolie Holland.
Okay.
And I had to write a small interview with her, 500 words. He paid me $50.
That's great.
And it was my first piece of published journalism. And so I actually did write a lot about music, but I never specialized in anything.
Right.
I just kind of was like scattershot, like whatever you want me to do. And I think that's because there was, at least especially when I was first starting, I was like, I don't want to be a journalist forever. I don't want to specialize. I don't want to be like, this is what I do. I'm a music journalist. Cause it felt like, I don't know. I just always wanted to
be more broad, right?
Yeah, I just felt like I wanted to do just a bunch of different stuff, and so I didn't want to be the guy that's like, "This is my specialty."
Yeah, because when you do inner music journalism, I mean, the same way that movie criticism, like you definitely have to follow that path. Like, yes, you're allowed to do other things, but for the most part, it's like, all right, if I'm going to commit to this is what I'm going to be doing.
Exactly.
So whereas like you wanted to have this more. I can kind of, I can do a piece of gonzo journalism and then I can do a piece that's something that is, completely unrelated and more me injecting my point of view as opposed to like going through this experience or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And now I think that, that was incredibly helpful because it allowed me to, as you said, sort of like pursue whatever I wanted. But again, like my last journalism job was this place called Gawker.
Of course.
And Gawker is definitely like the most punk rock place I'd ever worked in journalism, probably ever will. Like, Gawker was very much in many ways like was a pirate ship. It was like that, like literally when my boss was like, treat this place like a pirate ship. Like, It's like, you do what you want to do.
Yeah. Whatever's interesting to you, go for it.
Interesting to you, pursue that. And it's like, it doesn't matter how famous the person is. It doesn't matter how powerful the person is. Like our animating premise in many ways is like, put your thumb in the eye of the powerful. Like it was like, that was why Gawker was founded.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that I sort of like, I bounced around for 8 or 9 years, but then I found myself at Gawker and I was like, oh, this feels like home.
Right.
You know? And it wasn't surprising to me that Gawker, one of the worst, I worked at Gawker when I was living in LA, so I never went into the office, but when I was in the office, it's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen at an office, because it's like so bad for work.
Sure.
Which is that they just all shared like a music app on all their computers, so you could just play what you wanted.
Oh my gosh.
And so like
pure anarchy.
you'd have people just blasting Fugazi super loudly while other people are like trying to write, and sort of like, it's like it was just full of like all these people who were just like, yeah, I'm going to play the loudest punk music that I can.
Totally.
And
This is going to be punishing to everybody
just
else.
to kind of piss everybody off, because like that's what we do. And it just felt like, as annoying as it was, I was like, this feels like home. Like this is what
totally. You're like,
be.
I'm glad I don't have to go into the office because I could not get any work done.
Exactly, but I love it.
Right. Yeah. You're like, love the idea. See you guys later. I'm going to go back to my apartment. We got this dialed in.
There's a part of me that's still, I think that's also, I think that growing up in that environment makes you more patient too, because I'm like when you see people like freaking out because of like, there's teenagers like marching on the highway for like some protest, I'm always like, damn, I would hate to be stuck there. I would be pissed, but also I'm like, kids are kids. And fucking like,
I'm glad they're doing it.
Yeah, me too. Like I'm not out there, and it's like, I'm glad the 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds are still doing this, you know? I'm glad that they're still like saying screw you and like giving the middle finger to cops and like sort of like pushing back. Like I think that that's important. I really do think that that's important. And so it has made me a more patient adult to sort of like say like, you know what? I'm glad that sometimes people are saying like, screw you guys.
Right.
We're doing what we want to do.
Let's make this inconvenient for everybody.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Because that's what I used to do.
Of
and
course.
I like found a lot of purpose in that.
Right.
You know?
And because like you taking all of these, you know, all these building blocks, obviously who you are, and then the art that you create, and, you know, obviously all the writing, like I couldn't help. I mean, obviously we just met today, but just like watching you, you know, exist in the Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure there is like 9 million moments in your head where you're just like, this is like, it's sick. I really appreciate it. But like, I feel so out of place in every capacity, but obviously I have to act like normal, not
Absolutely.
freaking out in your head. Is it one of those things where you just like you're able to put yourself in those spaces and quote unquote act normal? Or do you feel like you're, you know, in certain respects, not all the time, like crawling out of your skin?
Both, you know,
Okay.
I think it's both. It is. I think that and I like sort of actually, I don't often, sort of point at this as being sort of like incredibly, like maybe it is. I think that sort of like, who knows why we make the decisions that we make, but I think that there is a part of me that I think being raised Black in a predominantly white environment or an environment that was not predominantly Black, or even sort of like partially Black,
right.
sort of
resembling
like,
Black. Right.
I learned to fit in.
Yeah.
Because if you don't learn to fit in, then you don't have friends. And sort of like, it was important to me to have friends. I wanted to have like a healthy social life. And so I just learned to sort of like kind of be a chameleon, sort of like to walk in. And the important lesson that my father imparted upon me was, he said, listen, if you walk into a room and assume that people aren't going to like you because you're Black, you've already taken yourself out of the game. And so you just need to walk into a room with your head held high, and sort of like, if people treat you poorly, then that's on them. But like,
right.
You can also get along with a lot of different kinds of people. And so, that is sort of like, was very helpful. It was a very helpful lesson for me. And so now, even if I'm in a room where like I want to crawl out of my skin, I can certainly make it seem like I'm really happy to be there, you know?
Totally.
It's sort of like in all situations. And I think that has been beneficial. It's certainly been beneficial to my career, but it certainly feels, you know, I've been able to, you know, it was much harder for me, because that also is like, even in those kinds of rooms that are, even in the kind of like Hollywood prestige rooms, you're still there because like people are making art, you know, it's sort of like, it's like you're there for the purpose of like making something and putting art into the world.
Yep.
The hardest time in my entire life was college for me. And I went to this very small liberal arts school called William and Mary.
Oh yeah.
Where my dad had gone to law school there. And so, it was like the first time that I'd ever spent any real time in the South. It was like way more homogenous than even my high school, because now the Latinos were gone even. So it was just like affluent white kids everywhere.
Yep.
And like an affluence that I, coming from Arizona, hadn't, like I knew rich people in Arizona, but I didn't know like blue bloods in Arizona, you know,
Sure.
like people who like their
You've been rich since the 1800s.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Like my family came off the Mayflower, you know, like that's how rich we are.
Yeah.
And it's all these, I was like, what's lacrosse? Like it was all these white kids with swoopy hair and like sticks everywhere. And I was like, what is going on? And so and that really threw me for a loop. And I was like coming from Arizona I was like in flip flops and like, you know, fucking ripped jeans and like band shirts and like listening to Jawbreaker all the time. And there was like the biggest mistake that I ever made, truly in sort of like my college career, and probably one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my life so far, was that I found that scene. I found like a punk scene at college.
Sure.
And they were like, it was like all these guys, it was like there's a frat that was kind of like known for like, it was like considered like the gay punk rock frat. Like it was the only frat with like openly gay members.
Sure.
And like a lot of punk members and sort of like a lot of guys who worked at the radio station.
Right.
Were always going, like I went to see the Get Up Kids in Richmond with this guy Chazzy, who sort of was from Richmond, and he was like,
yeah, come on over.
I remember having,
let's go to Twisters.
This was like a real moment, definitive moment, because like when we were driving up, we passed this poster and J. Rue the Damager was playing the same night.
Okay.
And I was like, should I go see J. Rue instead of the Get Up Kid? I was like, where did my loyalties lie?
Totally. I'm torn between two worlds. Yeah.
But I went to see the Get Up Kids because that's what we were going to go see, and it was the Get Up Kids and the Anniversary.
Okay.
And there was there was these hardcore kids called 804. That's sort of, because 804. Do you know 804?
Very familiar.
Oh, really?
There was a band called Landmark. From that
really?
Particular, but yes.
But 804 threw a brick through the Get Up Kids bus window that night, and it was like turned into like melee. I do remember this. Yeah. I was like, I'm glad I came to this show.
You're like, this is way more exciting. Way more exciting. Yeah.
But so Chazzy, like, it was like, I found this community and I was like, these guys are cool. This is fun. The problem was I was an 18-year-old boy and the girls didn't really hang out at that house. Sure. Sort of like the girls hung out other places.
Of course.
I wanted to sort of like meet women.
Yep.
And so I didn't sort of like hang out with those guys. I ended up hanging out with an entirely different group of people. Yeah. I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable for the next 4 years. I was like really, really just kind of like, I feel like an outsider.
Sure.
I sort of aligned myself with these guys who were very straight-laced, you know, future politicians and stuff. And it was like, because I felt like, well, this is what I need to do.
This is what you need to do. Of course.
You know, like, it's like not playtime anymore. It's college. I sort of like need to figure out my life. I'm not going to be an artist. You know, that's not for me. I'm probably going to need to go to law school at some point.
Right.
And I was just miserable. There's no way I would have ever got into a law school with my GPA because it was like a disaster. And I really do credit sort of like my misery in college with abandoning that part of myself.
Sure. Because you felt like you needed to grow. Like there's so much of that attachment you have to youth culture that you feel like at some point most quote unquote normal people grow out of it.
Exactly. And that's how it felt. It was like, I need to grow up. I can't just sort of like be this way anymore. And and I sort of like look at that time in my life as pretty disappointing because I think I could have had a really great time.
Sure.
Had I sort of just stayed true to sort of like who I was and what I was interested in.
Yeah.
And not tried. It was like the first time that's not the truth. It's not the first time, but it's kind of like, that was the last time that I ever really tried to fit myself into a mold.
Yeah.
Sort of like I really tried to become what I thought an adult was and sort of like what a successful adult looked like. And
of course.
I really tried to say like, you know, but it was only in sort of like optics because I never did classwork. I was a terrible student. I sort of like I was like a disaster of like an actual, if I was actually looking at sort of like what success looks like, I was not successful by any means.
Right.
But
you were aligning yourself with a part of it, but then you're like, I'm not delivering on this end of the bar.
Because I was like, I hate this.
Right.
And I kept looking at the gay punk rock friend and I was like, those guys are actually having fun. This sucks.
Yeah.
Like I'm hanging around with like people that I have nothing in common with.
Totally.
You know?
Right. Yeah. I was hanging out with people who obviously have a lacrosse stick and you're just like, I literally don't even know where to begin with this.
Exactly.
I don't know why you're throwing around this ball.
Exactly.
The notion, I mean, people clearly have connected, music, filmmaking on the DIY level where it's like most people, as they're putting stuff together, it's like they're not asking permission. They're trying to, fund things in a shoestring budget and stuff like that. As you started to, get into obviously Hollywood, I mean, I know you experienced a ton with the writing world and everything, and worked on a variety of projects of all shapes and sizes. Like when you first started to, fall in line with the idea that like, hey, like I got this script, like it's, it's kind of cool. Like, how did you develop the skin to constantly get rejected? Because I'm sure,
it's like you have to, it's the only, to me, like resilience is like the number one quality that any artist should have.
Yeah.
Like doesn't matter if it's film, doesn't matter with anything. It's like I said, like I came home, I used to leave my day job and come home and write.
Yeah.
Because I found value in like the doing of the thing. That's what I tell everybody all the time is like, anytime a young person's like, how do you get into art? And like, what do you do? And I always say like, I always say like the first thing that you should think about, like right now, if you really find yourself interested in this, commit yourself to the idea that you'll never make it. Like commit yourself to the idea that like, what if you never be like, whatever success looks like to you, commit yourself to the idea that you'll never achieve that,
Right.
Like, do you still want to do this? Like, do you still want to make music? Do you still want to go home and write a book?
Right.
Do you still want to go home and sort of like work on a movie? If you'll never be quote unquote successful, because if you don't, then like you shouldn't do this, and that to me was also, I think, helpful in, it was seeing so many, like, I think that, and that was something that I think is, again, like probably wormed some way into my brain when I was a kid, was like, I hung out with all these kids in my youth who like made art because they were having fun.
Of course.
There's
like no ulterior motives.
Art Full of Bosnians wasn't trying to get a record deal. What I mean? They weren't like, they never fancied themselves like, we're going to be on Def Jam. You know what I mean? It was just like, we have fun. Like, this is it's fun to play music.
Right.
It's fun to be creative. It's fun to hang out with your friends and like make stuff. And there was this kind of like DIY, there's just joy in the making of it, as opposed to like, there's joy in success. Like success is the making of it. Like that's what the success looks like, is like making music and playing a show and like having fun.
Yeah. Putting out a demo. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, that probably sort of like was somewhere in my brain. And I just, I would write just because I needed to write. I felt like I want to write. I need to come home and write something. That's sort of like where I find my joy.
Right.
And my passion. And so I think that is, that's an incredibly important lesson that I think you learn in that scene, is like, just make it because you want to make it, because you sort of like feel passionate about this, as opposed to make it because you're going to get famous. It's like that, so much of the, like even J. Really Damage, like it's not like he wasn't famous,
No.
Like there's so, like, even when rap was like really taking off, there was still a bunch of music that I listened to that was just like, oh, these people aren't famous.
No.
But I love it.
Of course.
It's like, and it's like so many punk fans that I listen to, it's like, these people aren't famous, but I love it. And there's something beautiful about that. That I always think about that now, is like, who cares? Like I always think that like, it doesn't, obviously Hollywood is just, there's so much money involved with it that, it's a business, and sort of like you want to make some money so that people let you continue to let you make stuff, but at the same time, like, do you know Connor O'Malley?
Oh yeah.
So I think Conor O'Malley's a genius, and sort of like I've told him as much. And Conor O'Malley is just like makes
stuff.
He'll just go out and make movies,
right?
You know, scrape together $30,000 with like 6 of his friends, and then they'll go make a movie. And I think it's some of the best stuff out right now. Like I think he's making shit that's like so much more interesting than what people with $200 million are making.
Sure.
You know? And it's funny. He had me do he asked me to come do a Q&A with him for this new movie that he did called Rap World. And Rap World, by the way, if people haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's about 3 dudes in Pennsylvania who decide to make a rap song. And it's just like 3 guys who are just like, we're going to go make a rap song tonight at our friend's house.
We got this.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's so good. And like, and I was watching it and I was like, and when I did the Q&A, I was like, were you guys, I said like watching the film really reminded me of these skate videos that I used to watch called Land Speed and like CKY and like Bam Margera like back in the day, right?
Yep.
With all my friends who skated and were sort of like in punk bands, and like we would sit around and watch these videos over and over and over again. And he was like, yeah, that was like one of our,
that was the inspiration.
Like, he was like, that's one of our main inspirations. And I think that there is like, you know, it wasn't like, I didn't know that going in, but it also wasn't surprising to me. Like, because it's like the indicators of like, oh, you came from this scene the way that I came from this scene, and sort of like the touchstones and hallmarks of like what it was to grow up in that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see it if you're paying attention and you sort of like know what it is. And I saw it. And so to me, that is, so like, yes, this is a long way of answering your question. Like I just think that the resilience, so much of that resilience comes from the idea that like even small stuff can have a huge impact on the world. And sort of like really there's music that I listen to that like nobody has ever heard of, but it's still so meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's like a very important lesson when you're growing up, is to sort of like, and want to be an artist, is that like, even if you don't make E.T., that's okay.
Yeah.
Because like, if you make something that's sort of like, somebody's going to find it. Like somebody will find it and it will be meaningful to them.
Totally.
You know, and that is.
You're stripping, to your point, you're stripping away all the artifice.
Exactly.
Of the goal of said thing should be the simple expression of whatever it is that you want to get across.
Exactly.
And that once you understand that, it's like, oh yeah, that like everything else that I experienced beyond that is gravy, which is, you know, it's difficult for some people to wrap their brains around that, but it's just like, oh yeah, if you're able to, you know, play an out of state show, if you're able to, you know, get into one, you know, film festival, like that's great. You're like, I wasn't expecting any of that.
Exactly. And I think that like, that is just, it's because so many of my heroes growing up were just making stuff not without getting famous.
Yeah.
And they kept doing it over and over and over again. And you could tell it's like, oh, they just love this.
Right.
You know, they just really find value in the making of it.
Right.
Not the sort of like selling of the thing.
Of course. Yeah. Well, the last thing that I want to hit on is I'm putting you on the spot, obviously, from a sort of, you know, band perspective. Like if you're building your Mount Rushmore, so to speak, obviously you don't have to limit yourself to, you know, punk or hardcore or hip hop. You could go anywhere you want. What are the, you know, the foundational bands for you that, you know, inform that you want to etch in stone? I know. Wow. I realize it's hard because I know. Well, so Mount Rushmore is 4 presidents. 4.
It's only 4?
I think it's 4. I could be wrong. This could just show an absolute deficiency.
Let me look at it. I mean, there's no reason to have questions anymore.
No, there's no reason to have questions. I think you may be right. It might be 5, but for whatever reason.
No, it's 4.
Okay. Phew.
You're right. It's 4.
Okay.
There's always this crevice here that throws me. That's what it is.
Right. You could.
There's a face there.
At any point, we could put another one in there, but I think 4 is safe for now.
Ooh, this is a really good question.
Thank you.
I would say, Propagandhi.
I love that.
I would say, Prince.
Love that.
Because Prince was doing something that I was like, because Prince especially was like, Prince was weird for sort of like just because he was Prince, but Prince was also weird because he was black.
Yeah.
And I sort of like remember thinking like, oh, this is like, you never see sort of like his ability to, especially sort of like with Black masculinity and sort of like everybody being so sort of like identified with hypermasculinity and sort of like his willingness to sort of like be flamboyant.
Oh yeah, he subverted like every checkbox where it's like, all right, you're not from LA or New York, you're Black, you are wearing absolutely ridiculous like there's like everything was going against him.
Yeah.
And he just put his head down and was like, no, it's fine, I'm going right through.
Exactly. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then probably Miles Davis.
Okay.
And then I would say Andre 3000.
Okay. That's
Outcast. Yeah, but the Outcast, but Andre 3000 again is just like,
right.
Was just the older that I get, the more that I'm just like, oh, this is probably my favorite rapper ever. I think that he's just so unique and interesting and so talented. And,
right.
And again, like I just admire all these people who have like learned to stay true to themselves. I think that is very, very, very difficult to do, particularly sort of like now that I'm sort of in the machine, sort of like seeing how hard it is to just sort of like say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is who I am, regardless of what you think about it. But yeah, I mean, Refused could go in there.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of,
like, there's so much, but I mean,
yeah,
I also love Steely Dan, but that felt incorrect to say.
Many of those artists fall into I was not supposed to like them as a kid, and then as you start to grow up, you're just kind of like, this is really good. Like I understand why people like
exactly.
Yeah,
like all this, I'm like now, because it's like a little, it's a little aggro to play.
Of course,
I want to play.
Absolutely, you're not going to bum everybody out. Yeah, of course,
yeah.
Right.
And so, but like I still have like. My sort of like go-to punk rotation is when I'm driving or when I'm at the gym. That's
of course.
Like always my.
Yeah, that's the space where you're like, I know this is obviously not for everybody, but this is chord time, everybody.
Exactly.
This is what I got. All right.
Exactly. But I mean, Hot Snakes is like all those bands from all the San Diego bands were like,
oh yeah.
So are you from San Diego?
I'm not. No.
No. But that was another thing too, is that being in Tucson, we were so close to California.
You were.
And we all were like,
I wish
we were in Cal. Like, why couldn't our families have just moved 6 hours west?
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like,
it's so close.
6 hours west.
Yeah.
But it was like, that was also like, man, Hot Snakes, Rocket from the Crypt.
Yep.
Drive Like Jehu.
Yep.
No Knife.
Oh yeah.
Pinback. 3 Mile Pilot. Like all of those bands too were just like, we were like, man.
Yeah.
And especially, why can't we be in that?
And especially because San Diego is such a weird scene where it was like all of those bands make no sense together sonically.
Totally.
But every single one of them was friends. They all played shows together. And it was like, and in other, I mean, obviously it existed in other scenes as well, but like when you just see that, it's like, wow, that all comes from San Diego?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
All right, I guess. And then you're sitting in Tucson just being like, gosh, we're so close. We're so close.
Exactly.
I mean, we have the Bled. Like, that's cool. Like,
we had the Bled.
Yeah.
We had Jimmy World.
Absolutely.
We had Calexico.
Yes.
Calexico were cool.
Yep.
They were from Tucson.
Yep.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, all of my friends' bands were great.
Right. Of course.
They're still around. Yeah. It's good.
Right. Exactly.
But, yeah, it was, if we had just gone a little farther, look, I'm in LA now. So
exactly.
It came to pass.
Just a hop, skip, and a jump. But
yeah.
Cord, thank you very much for hanging out. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for.
There we have it. That was Mr. Cord Jefferson. Like I said at the top of the show, watch his film American Fiction. He won a damn Oscar, and he let me see it and hold it. And I felt too awkward to be like, could I take a picture with your Oscar? Because like that, I don't know, it just feels weird. I was in his house. But regardless, his film's great. He's a very talented human being, and I cannot wait to watch him navigate the world in regards to the moving motion picture cinema that we all really enjoy, or at least I know I enjoy. So huge shout out to Cord, and huge shout out to me. I'm just really proud of this show for existing for 12 years, and I'm not slowing down. It continues to be fun and continues to present really engaging and interesting opportunities to have these sort of discussions, and I love to bring them to you. So thank you for listening. because that's really truly the engine that keeps us going. I mean, I truthfully would do this if like 10 of you were listening, but a lot more of you listen. So thank you. Anyways, next week, I have a great discussion with Rory Friars. He plays in a band called And So I Watch You From Afar. We recorded it while they were on tour with Caspian, so you can probably put two and two together and realize what sort of music they're creating. It's, beautiful sort of like post-rock stuff, a little aggressive at times, but a great band. So that's what we got next week. And until then, please be safe, everybody.
This podcast is supported by BetterHelp, offering licensed therapists you can connect with via video, phone, or chat. Here's BetterHelp Head of Clinical Operations Hesyu Joe discussing who can benefit from therapy.
I think a lot of people think that you're supposed to be going to therapy once you're like having panic attacks every day, but before you get to that point, I think once you start even noticing that you feel a little bit off and you can't maintain this harmony that you once had in relationships, that could be a sign that maybe you want to go talk to somebody. There's always a benefit in talking to someone because we can all benefit from improved insight about ourselves and who we are and how we behave with other people. So if you're human, that's like a good indicator that you could benefit from talking to somebody.
Find out if therapy is right for you. Visit BetterHelp.com today. That's BetterHelp.com.
Hey, it's me, Tyler. Bose open earbuds are stylish. The color, the way it looks almost like an earring, so I feel like it could go with anything. My style is very fun. I feel like I always look like I'm on holiday. I just really like playing around with it and tying it to the music. So yeah, I really feel like the music I'm making right now feels like a holiday, so I want to look like it too. Check out Bose.com for more.
High Five Casino. High Five Casino is a social casino with real prizes and big Vegas hits at highfivecasino.com. The hottest games right from Vegas, and all winnings go straight to your bank account. Hundreds of exclusive games, free daily rewards, and come back to get free coins every 4 hours. Only at highfivecasino.com.
High Five Casino is a social casino. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details at high5casino.com. High Five Casino.